Okay, welcome everyone to OneQuantum Africa weekly meetings. My name is Farai Majandu. I'm the president for OneQuantum Africa. We're really, overjoyed to welcome Justin Perron. He's an assistant professor at the California State University, San Marcos, and he's going to share with us some ideas and to lead a discussion on quantum education and training. And this is something that is really very appropriate for all of us as a community in quantum, and particularly obviously in Africa, because we've got a lot of young people in the continent who have got, we've got this strong, creative spirit and are always eager to learn new things. And I think it's very important that they begin to be given skills and exposure to technologies like quantum, since they promise to shape the future of tech as we know it. So a few things to get us underway. I always love to share this slide that was done by Viate Quantum Technologies, being co-founded by myself and Lesedi Modise. So Lesedi has done this beautiful work of looking at the landscape in Africa and figuring out where we see quantum play a role. Initially, obviously, there are a lot of things that can happen in quantum sensing and metrology, as well as in quantum communications. There are already projects and initiatives that are taking root in the continent. So from that kind of a scan, this is what emerged. Some of the things are quite obvious, like the limited existing digital infrastructure that we see in ICT space, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where we continue to lag other regions in terms of digital access. There are passionate people and volunteers and who are working very hard, and thought leaders who are working very hard to improve those metrics on digital access, especially in this wave of COVID, where we have all had to work online, and even education, the whole education system has to be administered online. So it means that some communities that have not normally been given access to ICT infrastructure need it now more than ever. So it's my hope that governments across the continent are working very hard to improve accessibility. On investment case for quantum hardware development in Africa, obviously that's a stretch. We think that what we may want to do first is to build skills, and we're supported by the availability of quantum hardware on the cloud, open access for quantum software platforms, which allow people to contribute from the continent. And, so there's no limit for us to start getting involved and to contribute. Then perhaps as we also build on lessons from high performance computing, then we can look at workforce development and training, begin to upskill people in industry, beginning to make our society quantum aware. Then as we look at that, perhaps down the line, governments, we have to come together with the private players in the continent and figure out if we can extend our HPC infrastructure to some quantum, or build some dedicated quantum hardware. So because there are other countries and players who are more, who are better placed at the moment to deliver on hardware, I think for Africa, the key opportunity is the development of quantum software with the concrete use cases. And the reason why this is something like creative is because we already have got a lot of startups that are raising record amounts of capital in the continent. And these startups are implementing AI and complex optimization. And their competitive advantage is going to be around, some speed up or some improvements in current capabilities, so that they continue to meet the growing demands of their markets. So with that, let me tell you briefly something about OneQuantum. So OneQuantum is a global community that brings people together who are active and interested in quantum. And how we do that, we've got 4 structures that I think are very important. And when I was looking at them today, I realized that they are all to support quantum education and training in some way, because our communities bring people together and allow people to interact, to build networks, to figure out what the technology is all about, and to learn more, and to what we would call to collaborate, to learn and exchange ideas in the quantum tech space. Then we've got mentoring, which allows people to develop professionally towards a career in quantum tech. Then we've got careers where we try to support through partnerships with the companies that are hiring quantum, try to support, inclusivity and diversity in the quantum workforce by also exposing people from Africa to global opportunities and supporting their growth into those positions as well. Then we do work on projects where we come together, small teams, around experts, and also even reach out to global experts and partners who could be companies who offer, quantum to work on projects that are relevant to the continent, that helps us to solve what we call appropriate problems or to deliver appropriate solutions in the context of the African scene. So we've partnered with Strange Works to use their platform, which is streamlined to address, streamlined to, foster collaboration. And we are always open to get more support from volunteers and from partners who are willing to, to improve access and help us to work on projects and develop skills and support growth of the quantum community in Africa. Talking of chapters, so currently, as I speak, we're really, glad to tell you that we're working very hard to expand access to quantum education and resources. And while we have been recently had the latest chapters, OneQuantum India, I've been working very hard to expand this effort in Africa, to also deepen our work in Africa, to make sure that the communities in Africa we build strong local communities where people begin to support each other and they would understand local conditions and local needs. And when we have strong local communities in individual countries, then it also allows the various stakeholders and even government to come in and support growth of quantum tech in these individual countries. So just in passing, I'll be giving more details as we go, but we are almost at a point where I can tell you about OneQuantum Libya. We've got a quantum chapter in Argentina. We've got a quantum chapter in Zimbabwe. We've got a quantum chapter in Kenya and another one in South Africa. These are ready to roll, and we are working with leaders in these places, and we thank them for coming through to support our mission. And we're working with them to support them to get this running, and you will be getting details as we go. Let me introduce our speaker today. So Justin is very kind, I should say. When I reached out to him, it was not at an opportune time to invite him for this presentation, because I had seen that they were hosting a workshop, but it wasn't yet underway back then. But he agreed to say, okay, I'm interested to share this with your community, but it won't be, I won't have had much time to look at the outcomes in order to come and make presentations. So we ended up adjusting, and I'm happy to have him today because he's going to share some latest ideas and insights and outputs from a discussion that was recently held to move quantum information science and technology education and workforce training forward. So Justin is an assistant professor at the California State University at San Marcos. His research is in experimental solid state physics, primarily focusing on silicon quantum electronics. He also has a deep passion for teaching undergraduate physics and working with students. Justin and team, like I said, recently hosted a workshop that brought together faculty from CSU and other primarily undergraduate institutions to learn the state of undergraduate quantum information science and technology education, identify challenges associated with implementing QIST curriculum at PUIs, and develop strategies and solutions to deal with these challenges. Something that I think is very important for all of us across the globe as we move quantum forward in our respective ways. So you will share insights about quantum education and workforce training. It's a pleasure to really have him. But before he comes through, I want to also tell you about next week. So we're starting a new season next week due to numerous requests. I think we are moving our sessions from 1500 hours CAT to 1900 hours CAT permanently from July. And so next week at 7 p.m. CAT or South African Standard Time, we are going to host Clarice Aiello. She's at the University of California, Los Angeles, an assistant professor there. Her interests in quantum sensing and control, now moving to quantum biology. So very exciting. I've had a chance to chat with her over the years to learn about their research at the Qubit lab, where they focus on quantum for nature, as she says. So we're going to hear more about this next week. Quantum sensing and imaging technologies for biology. So this will be very exciting. And please don't miss it, share it with your friends. Of course, we're going to include it in our newsletter and other channels as we go. So thank you very much, Justin, for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you on. The community in Africa is waiting to hear from you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can come through to share and give us your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Perron. Thanks for having me. Right, so thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. My name is Justin Perron. I'm going to talk about the Quantum Undergraduate Education and Scientific Training Workshop that Perron mentioned that we hosted just a couple of weeks ago. To just sort of briefly outline how I'm going to go about this, I'm going to start by discussing my path into quantum information science, not because it's particularly important or that anyone should care about me, but I think, especially at the undergraduate level, it's sort of representative of how the workforce is typically likely to end up in quantum information science, where it's just sort of a standard career path that became sort of quantum aware and adapted their skills for the new field. Then it also segues nicely into the motivation for having the workshop. And then I'm going to discuss, everything we did at the workshop, how we set it up, what was discussed, and sort of some of the main takeaways that are coming out of that. And then finish up with sort of just what I see as next for the undergraduate quantum education sort of landscape. I want to encourage everyone, ask questions as you come through. I'll hopefully there'll be time at the end as well, but don't, in the chat window or something, try to interrupt. And if I miss it, if someone could just flag me and let me know, we can stop and talk about whatever. I myself am originally from Canada. I was born and raised, so I started with all the Canadian stereotypes, grew up playing hockey and going to school. And eventually that actually led to being recruited to play hockey, not for schooling anyway, at New York, a state university in New York at Oswego, which was a predominantly undergraduate institution, so a small campus right on Lake Ontario, really nice. But most of my focus was actually playing hockey. I did manage to double major in physics and math, though. And then following that, I really enjoyed physics, so started to look at graduate schools, and ended up going to the State University of New York at Buffalo to pursue a PhD in physics. So another state university school, but a larger PhD granting research institution. My thesis was critical point coupling in confined liquid helium near the superfluid transition, which has absolutely nothing to do with quantum information science. Essentially, what I had to build and maintain a cryostat, basically to keep our experiments cold. What we did was I took silicon wafers. You can grow a thermal oxide on them, nanofabricate and pattern, essentially etch out cavities in that oxide to make whatever shape or design you want. Take a second wafer, bond them together and create sort of a hollow sandwich with whatever geometry you want inside. Fill that with liquid helium. We had to evaporate heaters and epoxy thermometers and heat sinks all over this. So man-made, like handmade our whole setup to essentially measure the heat capacity and superfluid fraction of liquid helium near its superfluid transition. Again, nothing to do with quantum information science, but we saw some interesting physics and some weird long-range coupling effects and different things, critical phenomena and finite size scaling near that transition. But really started to enjoy the research side of my PhD. Another thing that I started to do in grad school is part of the position involved teaching assistantships for some semesters. And I really started to enjoy the education side of it. That was the first time I actually got together with some colleagues from grad school and with the Physics Graduate Student Association, applied for funding to do some significant outreach in Buffalo's local schools. So we were able to pair with the physics, chemistry, and biology graduate student associations and bus in students from area high schools to campus to essentially have day-long hands-on activities, just learning about science and in the various fields, sort of interest them in the STEM fields and help motivate them to continue on in their education. So that was a lot of fun. Basically realized that whatever career I wanted to go into following my PhD, I wanted education to be a part of it. I really enjoyed it, almost more so than any of the actual research I was doing at the time. So I started to try, that speaks to faculty type positions. So I started to look into postdoctoral positions to try and sort of gain the experience that's typically required for a tenure track position. So one of my professors shared with me a postdoctoral position in the single electron device group at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So this was a position funded through the Joint Quantum Institute, which is an institute partnering the University of Maryland and the National Institute of Standards and Technology to basically look at single electron devices and their use in metrology and quantum information science. So their use as current standards and potential use as charge pumps, as well as as qubits. So I saw this position, but at that point I had no idea anything about quantum information science. So I was a bit intimidated in applying and going for this. But the description called for essentially they were looking for someone with 3 skills: cryogenics, nanofabrication, and low noise electrical measurement. As I mentioned, when I was doing my PhD, just studying standard condensed matter physics and that, I got quite skilled at cryogenics. I could maintain and keep fridges cold and get them to work quite well. And I had a lot of nanofabrication experience from building the confinements I measured. And it turns out that 2 out of 3 of those skills were good enough. I guess they assumed they could teach me the new science and the new measurement techniques on the job. And in fact, they did. So there wasn't that big of a hurdle, given my past, to kind of have an impact in the group. We looked at silicon quantum dots. So, it's not really important for today's talk, but here's a mace-etched silicon nanowire with some polysilicon gates that can create the barriers to isolate electrons along that conducting path. Some nice charge stability diagrams and bias triangles for measuring isolated electrons in there. We looked mostly, the focus of what I did there was mostly reducing low frequency charge noise and designing better qubits or using different materials to sort of reduce that low noise in those devices, those low frequency charge noise. So I learned this new field, started to get sort of more familiar with quantum information science. What was a qubit, how it could be used, what's the potential in that? And sort of just totally transferred fields, and then began applying for faculty positions to try and further my career and get back into the education side of things. I ended up applying to and getting a position at the California State University at San Marcos. So it's North County, San Diego. It is a predominantly undergraduate institution. There are a few master's programs on campus, not in the physics department where I'm at. The position involves both performing research, but it's very teaching focused, right? I think officially the faculty contracts, if you split up your time, it's supposed to be 60% teaching, 20% research, and 20% service. So I do get to keep up with my research on solid single electron devices, but I do quite a bit of teaching. I teach typically 3 courses a semester. In terms of our campus, we're a growing campus. We're one of the newer campuses in the California State University system. We have just over 16,000 students on campus, and over half of them are first generation students. So neither of their parents completed a bachelor's degree. And over half of them are from underrepresented groups in the STEM fields. So a very diverse population. We also have a lot of socioeconomically disadvantaged students on our campus as well. In terms of our department, it's relatively small. We only have about 100 majors on any given year. We only have 7 tenure track faculty in a range of fields, from astrophysicists to physics education research to myself in solid state physics. We offer bachelor's of science in applied physics, both in electronics and just a general physics track. We recently started an electrical engineering major 2 years ago, so our first graduates haven't actually finished that program yet. And we also offer a physics minor. So that's sort of the lay of the land of where I've been for the last 5 or 6 years, teaching at an undergraduate school with a very diverse student population. And I've managed to set up my lab. I was fortunate enough to land a couple grants to continue the same sort of work I was doing at NIST. I actually still collaborate with them quite often, looking at single electron devices in silicon, trying to reduce the noise and sort of optimize and make these types of qubits better. And I do, part of the job is I incorporate a lot of undergraduate researchers in my lab regularly, getting hands-on experiences with the wiring of the cryostat, making those measurements, analyzing the data, all of that sort of great stuff. Now, being a part of this field, though, this segues into sort of the motivation for Quest, right? I over the last decade or so, I've become more and more familiar with quantum information science as a field. And I don't think I need to convince anyone here today that it is an important field, right? You can just look at the government investments that come through. The United States has the National Quantum Initiative that it passed a couple of years ago. Canada's just got its National Quantum Strategy. Europe's got its quantum flagship. There's loads of federal investment into quantum information science. Generally, governments trying to maintain leadership or develop leadership in this field because they see and predict that it's going to be pretty disruptive. It's going to have a huge impact on everything from national security to the economy. There's also been, significant investment from industry. You've heard probably IBM, Google, Rigetti, several companies are investing a lot of money into developing actual products and business sides of things. So both of these investments are just examples of a lot of people putting a lot of money on the bet that quantum technology is going to have a significant impact on future economies. And with that comes workforce development. If there's going to be this huge revolution with all this quantum tech entering the economy, we're going to need people to fill those positions that come with it. All the positions from the very proficient experts who are developing those new technologies, all the way down to at the undergraduate level. They're still going to need people doing sales who know about the technology and sell it to clients. They're going to need engineers in the standard sense who are quantum aware and can work on different parts of the stack in that. So all the way back to 2016, about 5-6 years ago, the US federal government released a report on this that specifically cited workforce development as a priority. They spoke with a bunch of industry and academic representatives, and those representatives cited discipline-specific education as insufficient to maintain continued progress in quantum information science. Basically, if we're just teaching physicists physics and we're just teaching computer scientists scientists and all that, we're not going to have that sort of expertise or ability to continue to develop and lead the quantum information science sort of revolution. The National Quantum Initiative had the explicit stated goal of expanding the number of researchers and educators and students with training in the quantum information science and technology to develop that workforce pipeline. So clearly, I think it's very clear that this new field and this new technology is quite important, and workforce development is key. Being at my institution, I see lots of extremely capable, impressive students, and I want to serve them best. So I want to give them these opportunities and expose them to the field earlier on, so they too can have the same opportunities that students at, say, MIT that have huge quantum information science research networks, they have the same sort of opportunities to take advantage of this new field. So the question is, how would I do that? And the one clear and obvious and not easy, but way that I do it is through my research lab. So like I mentioned, undergraduate students will talk to me sometime earlier in their undergraduate career. We'll have a discussion about our work. They'll join my lab and start working on it. And they'll learn, how can an isolated electron in a semiconductor be used as a qubit? What is a qubit? And sort of some of the hands-on skills with measuring those devices. The problem is, I'm a small lab. I have maybe 1 or 2 students a year. There's a very small throughput. I'm not reaching very many students when I do this. And it's also a very narrow topic range. Yes, the students who graduate having worked in my lab will know what a qubit is and the physics of how qubits operate, but they're only really learning one device architecture. They're not learning much about, say, quantum algorithms and the computational complexity or any of those sort of things that are also a part of this quantum information field. So it's a really narrow sort of topic coverage. So naturally, I started to think about how can I reach more students in a deeper and broader way to sort of give more and more students the opportunities that are going to come with this field. And that sort of led to this whole workshop, because that's actually, I found, a difficult question to answer, especially for someone at an institution like mine. It's really small, doesn't necessarily have the hallways of laboratories and the multiple professors working in this field with the huge diversity of expertise that is required for quantum information science in many cases. So simple questions like, what are the main learning outcomes that we want to give to students if we only have them for a short amount of time while they're doing their undergraduate degrees? What are the first things they should learn? What's most important? How can we incorporate into the curriculum? Were all questions that I had that I didn't necessarily feel I had the best answers for. So I ended up finding some other people on campus. Shad Sharif was a professor in the math department who had worked a bit on post-quantum cryptography, so quantum proof encryption. And so I spoke with him, and I had a physics education researcher in our department who had worked on how to teach quantum mechanics effectively. So we started discussing this problem, and we decided, what would be useful was to get a workshop together and just bring together a bunch of faculty at predominantly undergraduate institutions like ours to essentially attack these issues. The main goal of the whole Quest initiative, or our Quest project, is to increase the amount of quantum information science being taught at undergraduate institutions that typically don't have these opportunities yet. The workshop in general was bring together the faculty from those institutions, inform them, have sort of some talks on where quantum education stands, and then just have them discuss and troubleshoot how they can do that at those institutions. In terms of the format, we did something. We decided to host the workshop. It was unique for me. I had never heard or seen anything like this, but I'm glad we did it this way. If I think of conferences or workshops that I go to that are useful for me, the big example I use is March meeting, right? The American Physical Society's March meeting, huge physics conference, 10,000 condensed matter physicists descend on a city, or virtually in the past 2 years, and just you have a week-long fire hose of new information where there's dozens of parallel sessions talking about whatever condensed matter physics has been done over the last year. You see a lot of interesting talks on new results. That's all well and good. You get some ideas, you learn some new things. But I always found the value, the thing that was most valuable about those workshops for me were sort of the hallway conversations, or the conversations over dinner afterwards, where you've just left a session on, say, charge, noise, and spin qubits, and you start to discuss what you just heard with colleagues and collaborators, and you propose new measurements. You think about how that might affect what you're working on, and sort of it can lead to some interesting new ideas that you're going to pursue. So we tried to essentially design the workshop so that was a structured part of the workshop. So day one took the place of essentially the talks. We had 3 discussion panels with a lot of Q&A from people who are working in the field. The 3 panels each had a topic relevant to what we were trying to do. The first one was establishing industry needs. We had speakers from the Quantum Economic Development Consortium speaking. We had someone from Google, someone from Booz Allen Hamilton. This basically, they all gave a little presentation on what they felt the industry wants and needs in terms of skills in their workforce. They described what a typical quantum engineer would do, what sort of skills are valued and why. And there was a lot of Q&A on that, where all the faculty participating in the workshop got to sort of ask any questions and get them answered on exactly what do you want from our students, so we can design our curriculum to sort of meet those needs. The second panel was the same idea, but we invited academics, people from these larger research-based institutions that have already started to try and implement undergraduate quantum information science education at their institutes. So There's several programs at these large institutes who've been trying to push this into the undergraduate curriculum for a couple of years now. We had them come out and talk about, all right, this is how we structured our course. This is how we structured our program. And this is what worked. This is why what motivated us to do it this way. These were some challenges we ran into. And the same idea, they let all of the faculty attending know how these people who've been doing it for a couple of years are approaching some of the challenges that we're probably likely going to face. The third panel was on effective practices for thriving in inclusive environments. I think this was an important panel on essentially how to make sure you're building any quantum information science curriculum in a way that's inclusive to your entire student body. As I mentioned before, the institute I'm at has a very diverse student population, both socioeconomically, demographically, even in terms of academic backgrounds. So how can I make sure that if I'm offering these courses or this new material, I'm making sure everyone has an opportunity to succeed in that? So we had a bunch of speakers who had been in different initiatives and projects that were looking at sort of solving the representation issues that exist in the STEM fields, so that hopefully as the quantum information science community develops and grows, we can have a more demographically representative and diverse community growing with it, rather than sort of establishing some of the representation issues that exist and then trying to fix it later. I think it's important to be intentional from the start and build a community from the get-go that's representative. So we had those panels. At the end of that day, we essentially took all the faculty that were attended and had one of those hallway conversations. We had a breakout session and basically got everyone to think, all right, we just learned a lot of interesting and useful things. Imagine next year, you're going to try and do that at your institution. What are the first barriers you're going to hit? What are the challenges, and what, just identify the issues with you implementing that at your institution with its resource restrictions and everything that goes with it. So we cataloged this list of challenges that attendees felt that they would face. So at the end of that session, the organizers sort of categorized them into groups. And that made for what day 2 of the workshop was. Essentially, we categorized them into 6 groups. And those were the topics of breakout discussions for day 2. And then the attendees would choose which breakout discussion they wanted to go into and discuss the problems that were in that category and propose ways of dealing with them. So the categories that we ended up seeing were, one of them was programmatic approaches. So a lot of people were trying to figure out, okay, I now have a better idea of what to teach and how I want to do it, but how am I actually going to fit this into our programs, right? A lot of undergraduate institutions, the curriculum's pretty set. They have what are called general ed requirements at liberal arts and state schools, where you have to take courses from various majors outside your college. And then the remaining credits you have in your degree are filled with those required for your major. So how can I fit quantum information science in that? Do I do it as modules in existing courses on one end of the spectrum, or all the way up to, do I develop a whole new major at my institute? We had 2 breakout sessions that were kind of content focused, one at the introductory or freshman and sophomore level, and one at the upper division level. And these were basically, all right, how am I going to design the content for that course? What sort of prerequisites are going to be required for that material? What material should be included? And again, how am I going to include it? Is this going to be a standalone course, or is this going to be modules in existing courses? Those sorts of things. How am I going to run, hands-on experiences are really valued. I'll talk more about that later. But if I'm going to have a laboratory, like how am I going to incorporate that into our standard physics labs, or am I going to start a new quantum information science lab? Questions like that. Another big issue that a lot of faculty seem to anticipate facing was gaining institutional support. Again, our institutions, a lot of them are impacted or just really full and there's space issues. So if I want to offer a course in quantum information science, I need support from my dean and the provost to actually assign me a room for that. And if I only have 5 students, that dean, they're not going to be convinced that this is a worthwhile use of university resources. It's not going to serve many of the students or anything. So convincing, not just students, but also the administration that this effort serves the students and is going to be good for the university is actually a challenge to get the resources to do these sort of things. So we had a session looking at that aspect of things. We had a session dedicated to the effective practices. So what are sort of, everything from pedagogical techniques to recruitment efforts and how sort of the culture of departments to make sure that we have those inclusive practices in our programs. And the final session was not final, they were parallel, but the final breakout room, I view it as kind of different from the other topics. The other topics were generally challenges that were associated with it and how you could approach those. We had a session on building community that was, I view more as one sort of tool that can be used to address a lot of those. How can you build a community around solving some of these problems? For example, as I mentioned before, at my institution, there is hardly anyone across the institution with any experience in quantum information science. That's, feeling like almost an island at my small institution creates a lot of challenges. Is there an effective way to build community, say across institutions or with partnerships that can help address these challenges and sort of share resources in that? So that was the setup and how we ran the workshop. It was only 3 weeks ago, so we're still putting together some of what we learned in that, but we did have some main takeaways, and we did identify a lot of resources that are out there or are about to come out that will help with any of these educational efforts. On the industry panel, one of the main takeaways relates back to sort of why I told the story of how I got into quantum information science is that, especially at the undergraduate level, traditional skills are very much in demand in the quantum workforce landscape. The quantum workforce is still going to need RF engineers with the standard engineering skills. They're going to need device physicists. They're going to need computer scientists to work on the coding and throughout the stack and all that. So you're going to need those traditional engineering skills, but they're very much looking for you, the employees in the workforce, to be quantum aware. You need to know how the skills that you have and what you're doing is going to affect the rest of the stack. One of the things that was pretty unanimous in the industry panel was workers who can sort of bridge gaps between specialties were gold. That's what they were looking for. Are you a computer scientist who understands a bit of the engineering and can communicate with that team to make sure what they're doing is going to work effectively with what that other team is doing? Those skills were really sought after, which led into another thing that almost, I guess didn't really surprise me, but I guess how much it was emphasized surprised me was the soft skills. Essentially, quantum technologies aren't going to be built by some lone genius in his or her basement. It's going to be a team effort, again, with experts from various fields, and those soft skills, the ability to communicate and work in a team effectively, were essential. Physicists and engineers speak different languages, right? You ask me as a physicist, how you're making your measurement, how low do you need the noise there? I'm just going to say as low as I can, as low as you can get it. I need it to be the best, but apparently a lot of engineers, if they're trying to solve that problem, they want, give me a number that I have to reach and I will optimize your system to reach that. But if I don't get that number, I'm kind of floundering. So the ability to communicate across teams, see value in what people who are approaching the problem differently from you were very valuable. Other things, hands-on skills were really valued. Have you done more than simply answer questions from a textbook and watch a bunch of lectures? Have you actually played with, say, some quantum software? Have you, programmed an arbitrary waveform generator to send the pulses you want and the timing that you need? have you actually worked on those? Those were really valued things when hiring off resumes and that. In terms of specific skills, one of the biggest ones mentioned was coding. No matter where you are, what you're working on, apparently, you will be doing some coding. Again, whether it's to interface with the machines doing the experiments, or whether it's working on some software level abstraction, to wherever you're doing, you're going to be coding, and it's going to be collaborative coding. So collaborative coding and version control were very important. One of the quotes from one of the speakers was, "Don't code like a physicist," which hurt me quite personally, because that is exactly what I do. But essentially, the way it was described to me in a way that made sense for collaborative coding was, one of the speakers used the analogy of, let's say you're working in your lab, you're running an experiment, and you need a screw that's a non-standard screw. So it has a non-standard thread and head size. So you design it, it'll work perfectly. You go to the machine shop, you fabricate the screw head, you bring it back, put it in your equipment, it works perfectly great, your problem solved. 2 years later, you've moved on to a different project, someone else is using that, and that screw breaks, or they need another one. How is the person handling that going to deal with that problem? It should be clear and self-evident the way to fix that. And apparently your code should be like that as well. Just someone in the chat window said code like a storyteller. I think that kind of makes sense to me. Your code should be self-evident almost in what it does. Variable names should be very clear, not var1, but temperature or whatever you're coding for. And it should be commented enough that so that anyone can look at it, know exactly what it's supposed to do and how to use it. Another quote was, someone said, what was last year's Nature paper is this year's function call. So essentially, a lot of complicated science that's being developed now, next year, snippet of code does that for what you're working on. So you need to be able to write that sort of code that's, anyone on the team can use and know exactly what it does. A very valuable resource in terms of what industry is looking for is this paper in Physical Review at Physics Education Research that came out last year. Heather Lewandowski was one of our speakers, and she pointed us to it. Preparing for the quantum revolution, what is the role of higher education? This was the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. They did a survey where they surveyed essentially, I think it was 60 plus companies that are working in quantum information science, and basically pooled them on what skills are you looking for in your workers? What are their job titles when they're hired? What sort of education did they have coming in that? So they've tabulated all the results from that survey. I think they've continued that work later on, so they might have more results coming out later. But essentially, they identify a list of skills that the quantum workforce that are being sought in the quantum workforce development. So a very useful resource for anyone trying to think of what should I focus on when trying to train people for the quantum workforce. In terms of the academic panel, there were a lot of takeaways. One, this is from the K-12 or Q12 initiative in America and the Q to Workforce. Basically, they developed this little PDF that's available there that are the 9 key concepts for quantum information science learners. Again, this is directed more at early learners, so high school and middle schoolers and the general public. But they outline 9 concepts that they want to make, help promote in their outreach to make the community more quantum aware as they come through. Again, it's for early learners, but there is significant overlap with what you would want to include in introductory courses. You might add a little bit more formal mathematics in that with those concepts, but it's a good starting point to consider the type of learning outcomes that you're going to want to include in your curriculum. In terms of programs that have already been doing this and trying to do that, almost all the programs, or actually everyone that was presented and discussed, take what's called a spins first approach to teaching quantum information science or quantum mechanics. So when you look at quantum mechanics, rather than saying, all right, here's the Schrodinger equation and it's a big differential equation, solve for your wave function and you know how that quantum system is going to work, which is how I was taught quantum mechanics and has been the typical way of doing it, they take a spins first approach. Basically, look at some two-level system, like the spin of an electron or the polarization of a photon, and take that two-state system and an operational approach to how it's worked on. And that sort of naturally brings about how quantum gates work and how that works. And there's actually one of my colleagues at Cal State San Marcos, but there's a lot of physics education research on this quote spins first approach to teaching quantum mechanics, and it is actually really effective. But if you're designing curriculum, that seems to be the way to go if you're going to introduce quantum information science. A lot of these programs have two tracks, software and hardware tracks. The software one has the advantage, I think, right now in that there are a lot of resources available through the cloud. So you don't actually need a lot of infrastructure necessarily, or at least not as much at your institution or where you're doing this to get access to actual machines, quantum simulators and that through the cloud, resources like Qiskit and that. So you can have a lot of those hands-on experiences just using those free remote resources. The hardware track, on the other hand, comes with a whole new challenge. Electronics, cryogenics, lasers, they're all very expensive things. So having money and the resources to get hands-on experiences and labs on a hardware track can be quite a challenge, even for some of these larger institutions. I mean, if you think about most research institutions, they have a lot of research labs with all this equipment, but those are typically used for research. It's going to be hard to get those into the classroom. Maybe you can share some of them, but getting the hardware for these experiences is tough. Recruitment apparently is also a challenge. Students need to know that these opportunities exist and be convinced that it's worth pursuing. Another approach that I think helps with that is there's this Q-STEAM accelerator project that recently started that one of the presenters were there for, and they're working on building these modules that can be used in various courses across disciplines to sort of bring in quantum information science. And this Q-STEAM approach is they're doing what's called inverting. They call it an inverted curriculum, and I think this makes a lot of sense to me to help with both recruitment efforts and retention. They basically front load the curriculum with concepts and applications rather than the formalism. Again, typically, if you look at how I was taught quantum mechanics and how I got in this field, you spend a lot of time on it. Here's how quantum mechanics works. Here's how gates work and all these systems. Then we get to the end of all this linear algebra and complex math. Now that we do that, we can do all these useful things with it. And it's kind of, I don't know why we do it this way, but put all the work and the hard things up front until you get to like the useful stuff at the end. I think a lot of that can deter a lot of people from pursuing it. Whereas this Q-STEAM approach with your inverted curriculum, front load the concepts and front load the applications, try to build a conceptual intuition with these topics and show how they're useful, and then start to build in the more complicated formalism in that. I think will make it easier for recruitment. People will see immediately what the sort of overarching goals of this field are, and then have that sort of motivation as they work through some of the more challenging aspects of it. In terms of resources, unfortunately, this one isn't available yet. I was speaking with, Lincoln Carr was one of our speakers, but he and a large group of others hosted Optical Society of America hosted an NSF workshop on quantum engineering, where they got, several of our panelists were actually involved with this, but they're working on a roadmap for developing a quantum engineering program. And it answers, I've seen the current version of this paper, and it is extreme. I can't sort of overstate how useful it is. A lot of the questions that are coming up on, what are the main learning outcomes we should shoot for? How would I design this course and all that are covered in this paper. It's called Building a Quantum Engineering Undergraduate Program. And again, it'll be on the archive. I think they're putting it out in like 2 weeks or so. I think is the rough timeline I think he mentioned. But if you are trying to build these things, like I said, that paper is going to be extremely useful to you. They outline here general modules and topics you can include. This is a possible way to structure courses. It's going to be really useful. The final panel was on effective practices. One of the things, so typically recruitment and retention are the two sort of pillars you always hear about when discussing these things. For recruitment, apparently relating the field to employment and opportunities is a big way of increasing recruitment. That seems obvious. In physics, we always run into this problem of not many people get jobs with the title physicist, right? If you look at, from my experience in our department, we do really well at placing our students in industry and job positions just in general as a physics department, but hardly any of them have physicist in the title. They get hired as engineers and different roles, and there's this whole idea of what's called hidden physicists. But just knowing that isn't enough. You have to let the students know that, although you're not getting hired as physicist, there are jobs and opportunities that come from that. So this quantum information science field is likely to have a similar problem, especially now when there's very few positions that are titled, quantum engineer yet. The other things in terms of retention, which I think is just as or more important, really, are a feeling of family in your program, in your department. A lot of these ideas came from, in the 90s, there was this downward trend in the number of people pursuing physics. So APS in American, I think it was APS, could have been American Institute of Physics, wrote what's called the spin-up report. They looked at this issue where the number of people pursuing physics was declining, and they identified several programs in the country that were actually thriving. They were seeing increasing in numbers and just bucking the trend and doing really well. And they did a lot of case studies of those programs, interviewed students, faculty, did site visits. And one of the things that was unanimous across these thriving programs when they talked to the students is the strong feeling of family within their program. They all felt an identity as a physicist in the department and that they belonged. And some of the things, ways you can build that are emphasizing, one big one I think is emphasizing a growth mindset. The science STEM has this stigma of, either you get it and you're a scientist or you don't, and tough luck, it's just not for you. And I think that's actually a pretty toxic view. Science is a skill, and with effort and training, you can succeed at it no matter what your background. And stressing that in your program and sharing that, being honest and talking about your struggles, and that can actually help promote that and lead to retention. So when your students struggle, especially underrepresented ones who don't necessarily see themselves in that field, acknowledge that this isn't a fault of mine. This is the standard way it's done, as you struggle through it to get better. The other thing is engaging students inside and outside the classroom. You can't just talk at students and hope they pick up what you're saying. You have to get them engaged in the process and actually involved with the work. Actively providing mentorship and recognition and support to your students help a lot. Undergraduate research opportunities was another one. Apparently, programs that offer undergraduate research opportunities to their students actually just see huge increases in the number of students that make it to graduation, which really should be, I think, the key metric for how your program's doing in terms of being inclusive. Like, yes, if you have huge recruiting efforts and get a lot of students into the door, that's great. But if most of those students are failing or not failing to complete the degree, rather, that's not a good program. You're not actually supporting them. So how can you do that? Undergraduate research has a huge impact on that retention. And apparently, it doesn't have to be you're coming and working in my lab. You can get research-like and authentic STEM experiences in your courses and other things, and how you design activities with your program as well. Lots of resources on these sorts of efforts. There's the spin-up report I referenced that's about 20 years old now that has some good resources in there. APS released their Effective Practices 3 report recently that are just all the effective practices for developing and building your program. Recently, the Team Up project, which is AIP's national task force to elevate African American representation in undergraduate physics and astronomy, released their The Time Is Now report, which is another great resource for these efforts. And the Mathematical Association of America also has a guide for evidence-based instructional practices in undergraduate math. Again, a lot of these are written from the sense of a specific discipline, but I think the techniques and the approaches are easily adaptable to any of the science fields, and should be used as you build your quantum information science. Challenges that faculty identified. I already went through a lot of these, deciding program outcomes and objectives. A lot of these were kind of addressed with the industry panel. That resource I shared goes through a lot of them. How to sell it to administration, so you can offer the courses, how to sell it to students and parents so they actually are interested and enroll in the program. Finding appropriate resources, both in terms of funding for, say, the lab equipment, but also expertise and faculty to help with that. Where to fit it into a busy curriculum were all big challenges. Critical mass, as we sort of named it. How do you get the number of students interested in your program so that it is offered regularly, right? If you get 20 students interested in the course one semester, great. If that's your whole population, and the next semester you only have 5, you're not going to be able to offer that course again. How can we do that? I mentioned getting faculty with the sort of diversity of expertise to run a broad enough program that you're really introducing all the topics that you'd like to is a challenge, right? There's a lot of, unfortunately, interdepartmental politics, right? Quantum information science is an interdisciplinary field. If you're trying to build a program with engineers and scientists, but your university has a college of engineering and a college of science, which college gets the money for those programs? Which one pays the instructors to teach those courses? All of those things can be a nightmare to deal with depending on how well your university gets along in that. So those are a lot of the challenges that need to be addressed. I already mentioned financial restrictions, lab budgets, and things like that, as well as, and finally, the sort of on-ramping or off-ramping or bridging between institutions to get sort of recruiting new students and transfer students into those programs. I think the majority of engineers in America actually spend at least some of their education at community colleges. So then transfer 2 years after 2 years there into a 4-year undergraduate or research institution. If those students, don't have a smooth onboarding or on-ramp into the field, right? If you have freshman courses that are sort of gateway courses into the field, and they transfer in without having taken them or without any knowledge of them, their time to graduation could be delayed. So reaching those students coming in so they have a smooth transition to the field is important. And then beyond that, pairing with industry and research institutions so your graduates have a smooth transition into the workforce or into graduate study, or also things at predominantly undergraduate institutions that really need to be addressed in the planning of the program. So moving forward, that is sort of what we're working on. We're working on a white paper to summarize sort of these challenges I've briefly mentioned and some of the techniques that we think will help address them. And another part of our program that I think is really useful is faculty online learning communities is we're running for the next academic year. So these are essentially groups of 10 or so faculty that will meet every other week throughout the academic year to support and troubleshoot how they are incorporating quantum information science into their course, whether it be they've designed a new course and they're trying to run it, or they're doing a new lab or a module in one of their courses. Basically, I think of them like a brain trust where regularly you are meeting to discuss the challenges that you're facing and bouncing ideas on how to approach them. Like my students are really struggling with Dirac vectors and change of bases for our qubits. What's a good technique for getting over this conceptual hump, or how can I improve how they're doing? So those will be going on for the next year. At the end of it, one of the goals is to have all the faculty who are participating have developed some, either a module or some curricular item related to what they were working on, so that we can then share that with the broader community and sort of provide, further ease other faculty from using it in their courses and make it easier so we can bring it to the broader student population. Beyond that project, the big things that I see a need for and likely to, and what I think are likely to be coming soon are the discipline-based education research community. There's a huge need, and we actually have some data because we did some assessments of a lot of faculty want vetted quality educational materials for this field and assessments to see if they're working. So I think the discipline-based education research community has an opportunity to lead and develop those things. There's a lot of online and different resources you can use to sort of introduce yourself into this field and work with them, and they can be used in classes, but no one, or at least they haven't made public, is really looking at, are these actually good resources or not? I'm sure there's examples of really good and really bad ones, but developing assessments to actually measure, does this work? Are students learning best when they do this and that? There's a huge opportunity for that. Another thing I think that we need is providing meaningful research experiences to a larger number of students from more areas. There are opportunities at large research-based institutions. They even have summer programs where they will bring students from other areas in. But again, that's, I think, a bit small of a throughput. So developing other centers and other places where more and more students can get those experiences are important. Reaching people earlier, that's already coming out with the Q to Work initiative and early learners to kind of promote quantum among the general population to, so they can see the value and sort of get more of an intuition with it before they get the standard pop science intimidation of no one can understand this. And lastly, I think we're going to start to see more and more of KIST education, the quantum information science and technology community growing out of this. They're already, OneQuantum is an amazing example of how communities can be used to sort of develop and address issues and build things. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, both regionally with education hubs, where high schools, community colleges, and undergraduate institutions will form strong communities that will help build this field. Research institutions and industry will pair with industries as well, and we'll sort of see this community landscape build. And I really, personally, I think building those communities and having them are going to be the best way to address any of these challenges. I think a lot of that is the value of these faculty online learning communities. I've participated in them for other reasons as well, but they form tight groups of people to help consistently work and address problems, and just they're really effective, I think. Anyway, so that's sort of the quick recap of our workshop from a few weeks ago. I want to thank you all for coming and letting me speak. My co-organizers, Shahed and Chuck from Cal State San Marcos, as well as the rest of the organizing committee who helped host the workshop, run the breakout sessions and the discussions. And of course, the whole Quest effort is funded by the American Physical Society's Innovation Fund. So thanks for them for seeing the value in this. Sorry, I think I went a little long. Yeah, my first time talking about this, and I probably rambled a bit, but are there any questions?
Shortest, thank you very much, Justin. Yes, we've got some questions. I'll pick some questions from the chat. Okay, let me see. So, do you think when the time comes for quantum to be fully used, we will have a ready workforce? Are we looking set for that?
Do I think we're set for that now? So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, I think. I don't think, right now, I don't think we have a workforce capable of manning, of sort of serving what the workforce requirements will be in a decade. So no, but on the plus side, that I don't think that workforce is here yet. There's this challenge of building a workforce for an anticipated economy, where I think which also makes gaining institutional support kind of challenging. You can't point to employment numbers that have existed for the past 5-10 years and see trends in it because everything's so new. All you can point to is these sort of indicators that it will be important. But I think as the field grows and we get more tech, the workforce capacity is growing along with it. So we're at a point now where we have to make sure we're keeping up. If you're not as sort of hyped about quantum information science, you might get worried that you're possibly training for these opportunities that aren't guaranteed necessarily. But I think one of the big takeaways from this workshop is the traditional skills and engineering skills are still sought after. So I think designing a curriculum that makes the workforce, building that we have now for just traditional classical engineering and science can be adapted to make it quantum aware, so it will serve that workforce without really taking away the value it has now with the classical workforce.
Okay, so sounds good. There's also another question here. How did you manage to get the universities or institutions that participated in this workshop on board, in case we may want to do that here?
To be honest, the harder part, so getting the people involved, like all the attendees and this list, I think it's still being shared, of coworkers, that wasn't the challenge. I think in the community building session, all you need is sort of a champion to sort of push that, someone who's passionate about the project and just get other people involved. And there were a lot of faculty in a similar position to mine who, as soon as I was like, are you interested in doing this? I sent a couple emails to chairs of various departments at colleges. I got a lot of people being like, yes, I want to be a part of this. The hard part was getting the money, so it wasn't doing it off, the sweat of my back and missing my entire family and everything. You need that sort of support. And the big sell was, I think, pointing out, again, it's a chicken and an egg thing, but some of those numbers, the reports from the federal governments, all the investments from industry and governments makes a strong case that this is an important topic. Don't take my word for it. Governments are investing billions of dollars in believing that this is important. So the foundations, the science, NSF and APS and the groups that are tasked with funding that sort of work should pay attention to it. So I think pointing to sort of indicators of what that workforce is going to be like is a good way of getting more funding for it.
Okay, Stanley has got a question. I'm not sure I can understand, but perhaps you can. What kind of value gives you publishing papers as an undergraduate in this field? I'm not sure. Maybe he's asking about the value of publishing in the field as one perhaps develops in quantum. I'm not sure.
So what is the value of, so I found that question. So in terms of what is the value of publishing papers as an undergraduate in this field?
Yeah.
So it depends. So different people will find different value in that. So if I'm an undergraduate student, publishing, and I'm able to publish a paper in my undergraduate career, that I personally, that's CV currency in my view. It is, you don't publish a paper unless you've been involved in a meaningful way on a project. So that, if you have that on a resume or a CV, you're signaling to whether it's someone doing some hiring or a graduate school that you have that sort of experience. It also, just doing what you would have to get that paper, I think builds a lot of the skills that the workforce is looking for. You've been in a lab, you've done those hands-on activities they're looking for. So I think there's a lot of value for the student, both in terms of what they learn through that process, but also it is a documented sort of proof that you have done those things when you're applying for that. One of the things sort of related to that in the industry panel, it doesn't necessarily, publishing a paper in 4 years is a huge challenge. Yeah, I'll see transfer students that come in after 2 years at a community college. They take their junior and senior years at our institution. That's a very limited time. They have to meet me. So that's typically in the first semester they're there. Join my lab. That happens normally the second semester, and then they have 1 summer where they can actually do work with me. And then if they spend that academic year writing the paper and submitting it, odds are it's not published by the time they're actually applying. So just doing that's a huge challenge. And some of the industry panelists pointed out that students should market their CVs and their resumes less like transcripts and more like what it is, a job offer, a job application where, don't list, I took physics 423 where I learned that, the course numbers and that don't mean anything. Describe the experiences and what you were responsible for doing. Publishing a paper is sort of a clear way of that being documented formally, but I don't think it's necessary to get the same effect. You can just describe projects you've done on. Anyway, I sort of rambled off topic.
Okay, sounds good. Then there's another one here. So because you involved people from industry, how was your engagement with them like in order to perhaps get them to be involved? And did they provide any funding for the work that you did in some way, or how did that conversation look like?
Yeah, so that was a big challenge for me. I'm on the academic side of things, so I didn't know. It was always like, the chain of connections to try and identify who would be good speakers in that. Thankfully, APS, the funders of this, were really good about partnering me with different representatives they have. So they have, career liaisons and things like that, who were able to sort of point me. They paired me up with the people who ran the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. And from there, I met some people. And so they put me in touch with a lot of industry representatives who were, amenable to working with us on that. So identifying the actual people to talk to was a challenge, but we were able to overcome it mostly through the APS connections. In terms of their willingness to do this, they're going to need the workforce as well. So I think they want to help in some way. We didn't get any, financial resources to run this workshop. When everything went virtual, this was originally going to be an in-person workshop. When everything went virtual, the effort didn't, but the cost actually dropped substantially, obviously. So the funding, we didn't need too much to get this off the ground. But I will say that I was pleasantly surprised with how engaged and willing they were to help. We've had interactions with some of the speakers who continued to ask, we want to help further. We want to make sure that industry input is going into how you develop your curriculum to make it better. I don't really have good advice on making sure it works. It just, I think the industry side wants it to work as well, because, they need the workforce, just like everyone else, so that they have people to support that.
Okay, perhaps one last one. What role do you see for the humanities in quantum tech as it evolves? There could be some other people who are joining who are in fields that are not scientific, and what would be your highlight of those skills, and how important are they to move quantum forward?
It's interesting you say that, because I think there is a role for that. Ultimately, the workforce sort of layout is going to be a spectrum. You're going to have, very quantum proficient scientists developing the tech at one end of the spectrum, and at the other, you're going to have, everything down to sales and the people who are going to interface with clientele and sell the equipment and be able to understand and speak that language. And we actually, one of the industry representatives actually discussed this quite a bit, and had a lot of humanities training in her education, and mentioned one of the things she said was she would actually love to see people with theater classes, so being able to communicate clearly and effectively and a lot of those skills that are typically focused more on in humanities were really valuable. And I think as the quantum industry matures, there's going to be more and more need for those type of skills in those roles where, again, much like the engineers are going to need the standard skill set and just be quantum aware. I think the same thing is going to exist on the humanities side of things, where there are businesses that are still going to have a lot of those roles that are served from outside of the sciences, but they need to be quantum aware. And so I think this motivates a lot of the pushing quantum into middle and high schools and towards the general public as well, to sort of start to develop those.
Okay, thank you very much. Come to the time for the lightning round, so that we conclude. So feel free to answer as short as you can. Perhaps my first question to you will be, what is the biggest misconception about quantum education at the moment?
Biggest misconception about quantum education. So this isn't my idea, so I'm stealing it, but that engineers don't have any quantum training in their standard curriculum, and that to be a quantum, that's one, and the other is to be a quantum engineer or involved in the quantum information science workforce, you have to understand a lot of quantum mechanics. I don't think either of those are true.
Okay. What book are you currently reading outside quantum?
Outside of quantum, I actually, what's it called? I started reading Carl Sagan's A Demon Haunted World. I had never read it. Someone recommended it to me, so I'm working through it.
Okay. What is your time management trick or a hack?
Make hay when the sun shines. I have two young kids, and up until about a month ago, I've been working from home for a year. And if you've ever tried to do that with two kids under 6, fighting for your attention, when they go to sleep, maximizing the time that you have to do work is key. So, yeah.
Sounds good. I can relate. So what is the best career advice you can offer to young people today?
Be nice. Like, it sounds facetious and like I'm kidding it, but most, I would say, of the opportunities that have worked for me, this is probably survivorship bias and all that, I've gotten from collaborations and connections with people, and basically be a decent human being to other people. No one's going to want to work with you if you're a jerk. So a lot of people I try to get along with, and they seem to get along with me, and they will help you succeed. So yeah, it's nice to be nice, and it's hard to overstate how helpful it can be.
For sure, sounds good. If ever people want to keep in touch with you, what is the best way to connect?
Probably email. My email is jperron@csusm.edu. You can find it pretty much on our campus's website. I'm on Twitter. People tweet. I'm not very good at it, but I do check it. But yeah, digital connection, I'm pretty responsive to.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks so much for your time and for the early morning that you shared with us. From there, it's afternoon for us here, but we really grateful you could come through.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. Someone said LinkedIn. I do have a LinkedIn account, but I don't use it as frequently. So it'll probably be a lot of ghosting on that. I'm not sorry, Tim.
Okay, so we've got a cocktail that comes soon after this meeting. If you have time, there's a link that has been shared. You can always come through, join, and have one-on-one chats with the people who manage to join us as well. So it leaves me to thank you so much, Justin, for all that you shared and for accepting to come on and be with us. We really appreciate it. All the best with what you're working on. We hope to keep in touch and to learn more on the next workshops and other outcomes that may arise out of what we have discussed here, because the education and training is very important to all of us.
Definitely. Happy to be here.
Thank you.